CNN has learned that the U.S. military has significantly depleted its stockpile of key missiles during the war with Iran. And according to experts, this reduction is so severe it has created a near-term risk of the U.S. running out of ammunition should a future conflict arise in the next few years. CNN's Natasha Bertrand is with us now with her reporting on this. It's some new reporting here. Natasha, walk us through what you've learned.
Yeah, Brianna, so according to this new study by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, which was, their findings were confirmed by three sources familiar with recent Pentagon assessments of U.S. stockpiles, the U.S. is running dangerously low on some of these key munitions that would be required to confront a near-peer adversary in the short term, like China, for example. So while the U.S. does still have sufficient munitions to continue bombing Iran, for example, if the shaky ceasefire were to fall apart, if they were to need to confront an adversary like China or like Russia, for example, then that could pose significant problems for the United States. Now, just to give you an example of how much the U.S. stockpile has been depleted over the last 7+ weeks of war on Iran, according to this assessment and the sources that we spoke to, the U.S. military has expended at least 45% of its stockpile of precision strike missiles, at least half of its inventory of THAAD missiles, which are designed to intercept ballistic missiles, and nearly 50% of its stockpile of Patriot air defense interceptor missiles, which are, of course, very key air defense munitions. Now, the U.S. military has also expended approximately 30% of its Tomahawk missiles stockpile, which are those long-range munitions that are really key to attacking targets further away. More than 20% of its stockpile of long-range joint air-to-surface standoff missiles, and approximately 20% of its SM-3 and SM-6 missiles. Now, this is important because these munitions take a while to be replaced. And according to our sources and this analysis, it would take anywhere between 1 to 6 years to replace a lot of these munitions. And so this is a really big problem that we should note that the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Dan Kane, he actually warned about as the administration was preparing to potentially go to war with Iran. He was raising concerns, we're told, about this issue of depleted stockpiles around the world, particularly ones that could be very useful to U.S. allies like Israel and Ukraine. So the Pentagon is preparing to ask for a supplemental from Congress for additional funding to try to replace these munitions, but it could still take quite some time before those are actually back in U.S. stockpiles, Brianna.
All right. Thank you, Natasha, for the reporting. Boris?
Joining us now to discuss this and more regarding the war with Iran is retired Army Major Harrison Mann. He's a former Defense Intelligence Agency official, also the Associate Campaigns Director for Win Without War. Major, thanks so much for being with us. When you hear that report, how much do these shortages concern you?
They concern me, and for more reasons just than running out of ammo fighting Iran. Part of this is a math problem that we knew the answer for before this war started, right? We knew what our stockpiles were, and I used to work with the folks at the Defense Intelligence Agency who used to do their best to count how many missiles and drones Iran had. And so, there's really two things that I want to draw out of here. One is that the folks, politicians and experts who were advocating for war with Iran, they were just kind of detached from reality. We've run out of up to 50% of strategic defensive interceptors a month into a war with a regional power, right? This is Iran. And from that, we also got to kind of extrapolate folks who are advocating for war with China. That is a global power. The fact that we are totally unprepared for these conflicts is not an argument for us to gear up for war, but it should make us a little more introspective when we have people saying it's going to be a slam dunk and we really need to fight these wars. The other thing I want to pull out of this, I think, you could be watching this report about us running out of all these critical munitions and say, well, wait a minute, don't we have the most powerful military in the world? Don't we have the biggest military in the world? We just spent nearly $1 trillion on the Pentagon last year. Why don't we have enough ammo? And I think it's important for folks to understand, especially as we move into talking about supplemental funding or a new defense funding bill, that these hundreds of billions of dollars that Congress gives the president for war largely do not go into things that we would say we need for war. The reason that we don't have enough air defense interceptors is because instead we've been spending that money on these big projects that are kind of designed to be expensive. I hate to describe it this way, but a lot of this $900 billion budget, and that's what Congress passed last year, nearly every Republican and over 50% of Democrats too, kind of becomes a slush fund for defense contractors. Raytheon, Lockheed, and instead of producing the defensive capabilities that you say we might need, instead of doing things like paying to get black mold out of the soldiers' barracks, instead of going towards getting better bomb shelters for the hundreds of U.S. troops who've been wounded in this war, we're building big vanity projects like the F-35 stealth fighter, which we learned pretty early on in this war is not that stealthy. Iran caught it on camera and shot at it, or like Ford-class aircraft carriers that the toilets don't work on. And so I think it's really important to understand if you see these numbers and are shocked or worried by them, more money is not the answer. More judicious spending is.
There's also an aspect to this, specifically when it comes to Iran, and I'll get to China in a moment, but financially it's asymmetrical, right? I've heard some experts describing the U.S. weaponry as a Ferrari out in the skies over Tehran, and the Iranians essentially shooting like a razor scooter at a Ferrari. It's way less expensive for them to take out the U.S. and Israel's equipment than the inverse. How does the U.S. make that more efficient? Does it need to adjust toward a more Ukrainian-like model?
So this is another reflection of our misguided priorities, I would say. Drone proliferation in the Middle East has been a threat for at least a decade. We saw them popping up in the Syrian civil war, and Iran has been a leader in this field. As you mentioned, Ukrainians, out of necessity, figured out much cheaper ways to deal with this threat. Why haven't we invested in them? Again, these are because of decisions that Congress and successive military leadership made. And it's really unfortunate because how did the first U.S. troops die in this conflict? It was a drone strike.
Yeah. I did want to get your thoughts on China because this morning President Trump said the U.S. intercepted a ship that had, quote, a gift from China. This is notable because as the president is saying that he was sort of surprised by this, we talked about last week the letters exchanged between he and President Xi of China, in which Xi effectively promised Trump that that China would not be supplying ammunition to Tehran. Do you think a shipment of arms from China could have gotten sent to Iran without Xi knowing, without Beijing being aware of what was being transported to Iran?
I don't think that would be possible, but we also have to note that the accusation here is a dual-use system.
I see.
So that could be electronics. It doesn't necessarily mean they sent them missiles. A lot of Iran's missiles and drones do depend on electronics, circuit board stuff that they can't manufacture domestically. So this could have been something routine, or it could have been China testing the waters and trying to keep the Iranian war effort going. It's hard to be sure right now.
Major Harrison Mann, thank you so much for the perspective. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.